Let's cultivate our motivation and begin by being aware of the faults of cyclic existence. That there is no security wherever we're born, no certainty. Things are always changing, and from one life to the next they change. And because of that changing nature, there's perpetual dissatisfaction. Things don't happen the way we want. We can't get what we like. We get what we like, and then we're disillusioned with it. We get born and die again and again. Neither of which are particularly pleasant, anything but. Our status is constantly changing. We can, within one lifetime, we can go from wealth to poverty, from loneliness to good reputation. From one rebirth to another, we can go from lower realms to higher realms, from higher realms to lower realms. And all these experiences we go through alone. So when we really look at our situation clearly in cyclic existence, we have to ask ourselves, do I want to continue in this? And is there an alternative? And if there's an alternative, what is that alternative? And what is the path that will take me there? So our alternative is liberation, the cessation of all that dukkha and its causes, and the wisdom realizing emptiness is the path that takes us there. But what about everybody else? Are we just going to look for our own liberation and wish everybody else good luck? Or can we see that everybody's exactly like us? That there's no real difference between us and others in wanting happiness, not wanting suffering. And that while others have been kind to us, and our life depends on them, our own self-centered thought has been a cruel dictator that we've lived under. So let's generate the aspiration to free ourselves from this dictator so that we can have real freedom. And then enable others to have that freedom as well. So, yesterday we talked about the perfections most of the day. The 10 from the Sanskrit tradition, the 10 from the Pali tradition, 5 of which overlap. And today we're moving into Buddha nature. Okay, so the possibility of awakening and Buddha nature, chapter 14. Okay, so is liberation possible? So you might remember that before I said that the people that are higher faculty disciples at the beginning check out, is liberation possible? Okay, so before they commit to the path, they want to really figure out if it's possible. And so for that reason, after determining that ignorance is the source of samsara, then they want to see if it's possible to eliminate it and how to eliminate it if that path actually works. And so they investigate the ultimate truth, the emptiness of inherent existence. And having determined that emptiness exists and that it's possible to realize it, then they can see that it's possible to eliminate ignorance. And when the kingpin is eradicated, all the henchmen of the afflictions die also. And that modest faculty disciples proceed based on faith in the Buddha and generate bodhicitta, and then go into they've meditated on emptiness before too, of course, but then they really investigate it much more closely. Okay, so here, it's at the end of the book. Because actually, in order to to figure out, to understand what Buddha nature is and to understand if liberation is possible, we need a whole lot of background. We can't come in as newbies because we won't understand what's being discussed. So that's why it's at the end, because we need to understand everything that came before it. Okay, so is liberation possible? I don't need that today, the room is bright. If the possibility of ending dukkha exists, then pursuing that aim is worthwhile. Two factors make liberation possible. The nature of the mind is clear light, and the defilements are adventitious. According to the Sanskrit tradition, the clear light nature of the mind refers to the basic, vivid nature of the mind, its clear and cognizant conventional nature that enables it to cognize objects. This capacity for the mind to be aware of or to know objects is already there. It does not have to be cultivated newly. So this is according to the Sutrayana, not the Tantrayana. Okay? So just by having a mind, and the definition of mind is that which is clear and cognizant, then just by the fact of that clear and cognizance, the mind has the capability of knowing objects. That's its nature. So we don't need to cultivate that capability. Okay, and so this is also the difference between a living body and a corpse, the presence or absence of consciousness. Because a corpse can't cognize objects. Only when there's consciousness present and then a living being present is there, awareness of objects. Okay, so the mind's inability to know certain objects must then be due to obstructing factors. So if the basic nature of the mind is to know objects, then it can perceive objects. then why can't we perceive things now? Okay, there's certain obstructing factors. A material object, such as a wall, obstructs us from seeing what is beyond it. Okay, so that's clear. There's a wall there. We can't see the meadow. There's something physical. Okay. An object being too far away or too small makes it imperceivable to ordinary senses. Okay, so the stars that are too far away, microbes, our ordinary senses can't perceive them. We need help. Okay, damage of the cognitive faculty, for example, being blind, inhibits our knowing a visual object. So if there's damage to our eyes, to our inner ear, to any of our faculties, then, we aren't able to know their respective objects. Okay. The type of cognitive faculties and the brain of the realm we are born into can obstruct knowing objects. Okay, so if we're born, when you live up here and you watch the turkeys, you begin to understand the expression bird brain. Okay, because while the turkeys have a certain kind of turkey intelligence, there are things that really you would think they would know, and they don't, For example, they always like to be together. They don't like to be too far from their friends. So if there's a bunch of them inside the garden fence, okay, and then one or two of them fly out, then the rest want to go out also. And there's inevitably a few that are left behind and they can't figure out how to get out of the fence, even though they've seen their friends fly over the fence, and they may have flown over the fence to get into the garden. It doesn't dawn on them to try and fly over the fence to get out. If the fence runs all along here, but there's a gate here that is open, you would think that they would go through the gate and go out. It's wide open, no obstruction. No, they will run along the edge of the fence, get to about here, and then turn around and run back. And they will go back and forth, clucking madly, because they desperately want to get out to be with their friends, and they can't figure out how to get out from behind the fence. But right where the gate's open, they turn around and go the other way. Just watch them. Yeah? So the type of cognitive faculty and the brain of the realm we are born into can obstruct knowing objects. A turkey cannot see simple things like this, because of being born with a turkey brain. So similarly, with our kitties, sure, they can see things and smell things and hear things that we can't. But when you try and teach them about ethical conduct and not to harm other living beings, especially mice and birds and, chipmunks, they don't get it, Their brain, there's a consciousness there. And in another kind of body, that consciousness could be able to understand. But being limited by that body, they can't understand it all. No matter how much we talk to them and explain to them. Okay? So that also limits what can be known. Human ears cannot hear sounds that many animals can, and animal brains inhibit elaborate conceptual knowledge and the use of language. So that's one reason why human birth is considered a very precious one is because our ability to use language and communicate with each other and conceptualize. And so even though we want to eventually go beyond conception in our perception of the ultimate truth, we have to use conception to understand what the ultimate truth is and to understand the reasonings that will help us realize it. Yeah. So again, the kiddies attend the teachings on Thursday and Friday night, and yet, how much goes in, I don't know. Yeah. So a further difficulty is that some things, for example, objects known by the 6 superknowledges, are so subtle, profound, or vast that the ordinary mind is unable to cognize them. To know these deep meditative concentration, sometimes coupled with correct wisdom, is needed. Okay, so our ordinary mind, being very obscured by karma, being very obscured by our afflictions and the seeds and latencies of both, then these objects, which are very subtle or profound or vast, we're obscured from seeing them because of the pollution on our consciousness. Okay. So the subtle latencies of ignorance on the mind and the mistaken appearances and perceptions they generate prevent us from knowing all phenomena. Okay, so why aren't we omniscient? Yeah, the ultimate culprits are the subtle latencies of ignorance on the mind and the mistaken appearances that they produce. The mistaken appearances meaning that everything, all the conventional truths that we perceive appear truly existent even though they aren't. And that's due to the flaw on our mind stream, the latencies of ignorance. Okay. When the wisdom realizing the subtle selflessness of all phenomena has completely removed every last obscuration, the mind will naturally perceive all objects because there will be nothing to prevent this. Okay? So the basic nature of the mind is to perceive things. Yeah? So, why can't we perceive? Because there's obstructions. Then, can these obstructions be eliminated? Okay? And His Holiness is hinting at that because he's saying that without anything to obscure the mind, then we can see everything. Okay. Thus, a Buddha's mind is omniscient, capable of simultaneously realizing all phenomena, including their emptiness, in a single cognitive event. So this is something only a fully awakened Buddha can do. The Aryas, can know ultimate truths. They can know conventional truths in a mistaken way, but they can't know both simultaneously. Okay, so only a Buddha can. The basic nature of the mind is clear like water. Any dirt in the water is not the nature of water and can be removed. No matter how murky the water is, its essential clarity is never lost. Similarly, afflictions are adventitious. They have not permeated the basic nature of the mind. Not every instant of the mind's clarity and cognizance is associated with afflictions. If the afflictions were inherent to the mind, they would always be present and it would be impossible to eliminate them. Okay, so this analogy with the water. You have dirt in the water looks really muddy, but if you wait, the dirt will settle and you'll have clear water, because the nature of the dirt has not entered into the nature of the water. In the same way, the sky is completely open and clear. We may have clouds and not be able to see the sun and moon, but the clouds are not the nature of the open sky, and so they can be eliminated. And then we can see everything else, the stars and the sun and the moon. Okay? So adventitious means temporary. Yeah. They haven't entered in or permeated the nature of the mind. There's something that can be removed. Okay. Also showing that they can be removed is that not every instance of the mind's clarity and cognizance is associated with afflictions. So afflictions are not manifest every single moment of our life. Many moments they're manifest, but not every single moment. And if they were the nature of the mind, then they should be there every single moment. Okay. So the nature of mind is also said to be clear light because the mind is empty of inherent existence. So this term clear light, it means different things in different contexts. Yeah, so it can be confusing sometimes. Sometimes clear light refers to just the clear and cognizant nature of the mind. Clarity meaning that first the mind is formless, it isn't atomic or material in nature, and also that it is clear and can, like a mirror, and can reflect objects. And cognizant meaning that it can know or apprehend objects. Okay, so sometimes clear light refers to that. Other times, in other contexts, clear light refers to the emptiness of the mind, the absence of inherent existence of the mind. Okay, so the clarity and cognizance is the conventional nature of the mind. The emptiness of inherent existence is the ultimate nature of the mind. So they can both be referred to as clear light. And then clear light has other meanings as well. Okay, so the nature of the mind is also said to be clear light because the mind is empty of inherent existence. This is the mind's natural purity. Okay, so every object that exists, its ultimate nature is free of inherent existence. And that emptiness of inherent existence is there with every single object that exists. It's not something that is tacked on, but for anything to exist, it must be empty. Something cannot exist unless it lacks inherent existence. Yeah, because if things did inherently exist, actually, then they couldn't exist because things that are inherently existent can't change, and things around us change all the time. Okay. So this emptiness is the nature of all phenomena, including the mind. Okay, and so it's called the natural purity of the mind because the mind, by its very nature, is empty of inherent existence. Yeah, and that emptiness is what allows for the afflictions to be eliminated. Okay, it's what allows for the mind to be able to change and attain awakening.
I'm thinking about when we went over the 400 stanzas, and it was stated that if any object wasn't empty, i.e. existing inherently, then viewing any part of it would reveal the entirety of it.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the case, and we determined that that's impossible because that's not how things are. You don't view a part and see the whole. But this is claiming that through pure realization of the emptiness of inherent existence,
Mm-hmm.
then viewing any one event, which would be a part of the whole, would reveal the whole of all knowledge to a Buddha's mind.
Mm. No. You're confusing two things. Yeah. One is, why the reasoning why things can't be inherently existent. Because if they were, then when you saw a part, you would be perceiving the entire object.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. A Buddha, is free. The mind is free of all obstacles, so it can perceive everything. So when a Buddha looks at the thermos, it may know all the sides of the thermos, but it doesn't. The Buddha doesn't think that each part is a thermos. Okay, because each part is not a thermos. Yeah. So even though the Buddha can see all the different parts, there's no error in the consciousness of thinking that, each part is a thermos.
Is the error in the consciousness thinking each part is a thermos what is preventing it from seeing the entirety of the object through the perception of one part?
No.
That's not the obscuration?
No, it's the grasping at inherent existence that obscures the mind. The seeing, the reasoning that if things existed inherently, then you should be able to see the entire object when you see the part. That's the reasoning, because then we go, oh, but you can't see the entire object when you see the part. Yeah? And so then that helps you to understand emptiness. Yeah, so it isn't, that's the reasoning used to negate emptiness. So it's not that, negate inherent existence, thank you, and to realize emptiness. Yeah, so it's not something that the Buddha, that is an obscuration that the Buddha overcomes. Okay. Okay, so the nature of the mind is also said to be clear light because the mind is empty of inherent existence. This is the mind's natural purity. If the mind existed inherently, the ignorance grasping inherent existence would be a correct knower. Okay, so it would be a reliable cognizer that's understanding the object correctly. And then, ignorance would be a correct knower, and then it would be thus impossible to eliminate ignorance, because if you have something that's a correct knower, what's going to overcome it? You can't refute it with logic. You can't do away with it in any way because it perceives things correctly. Okay? So then it would be impossible to eliminate ignorance, and ignorance would realize reality. And if ignorance realized reality, then the way we perceive things right now would be their ultimate nature. So if I perceive some guy as a jerk because he did something I don't like, then that would be his ultimate nature. Okay? If that were his ultimate nature, then I would always perceive that person that way. And everybody else who had any kind of correct knower would also perceive that person that way all the time. And that person themselves would perceive themselves that way. And that person could never be anything other than a jerk. Okay? They couldn't be an engineer. They couldn't be a parent. They couldn't be a painter. All they could be was a jerk.
Would they be a human being?
What?
Would they be a human being?
No, they couldn't be anything else. Yeah, because if you're inherently one thing, if you're inherently a jerk, you can only be inherently one thing. Yeah. So that means that from the time he popped out of his mother's womb, he's been a jerk. Okay? Now, sometimes when we're really angry at people, that's the way we look at them. But, when we calm down, we can easily see that that's a wrong conception. Okay? And also, if ignorance were a correct cognizer, then since we often look at things and see them as not changing, then everything, if ignorance that were a correct perception, then things would have the nature of permanence. They could never change. Okay, if they could never change, we could never grow from being infants to adults. Yeah, we could never clean our clothes. We couldn't build a building. Nothing, because all those things depend on change, depend on causes and conditions. Okay? So ignorance can't be a reliable cognizer. Yeah, it's an erroneous one. And if it were a reliable one, then it couldn't be eliminated. And, then we could never gain new knowledge. Nothing could ever happen. Everything would be frozen. And it clearly isn't like that. However, the mind and all other phenomena exist dependently. So if something exists dependently, then it can't have its own inherent nature, because an inherent nature means it doesn't depend on any other factors. It is what it is from its own side, unrelated to everything else. But when we actually examine how things exist, everything exists and is posited in relation to something else. Yeah? Results come about due to causes. Whole objects come about, are there because of an accumulation of parts. We look at things, we conceive them, we give them labels and names. So things exist dependent on other factors that are not them. So they can't exist inherently, they exist dependently. So that's also showing why ignorance is not a correct knower and can be eliminated. Inherent existence does not exist, and the ignorance that grasps it is a wrong consciousness. Yeah.
I have such an in-showy understanding of this stuff, so I'm sorry if it's really simplistic. So is change inherent then? I mean, change would be inherent.
No, no, because change depends on other factors, doesn't it? For something to change, it means that different things are influencing it.
But if nothing else is inherent, doesn't change have to occur? So would change be inherent?
No, that's not what we mean by inherent. By inherent, we're talking about something having an essence of its own that's independent of other things. Yeah. So this is part of the problem with translating things into English, because the word inherent can have different implications in different situations. Yeah, this came up before, remember? Yeah. Okay. Wisdom perceives the emptiness of inherent existence, yeah, which is the way how phenomena actually exist. Since it realizes the opposite of what ignorance grasps, wisdom has the ability to uproot ignorance. So this is something important, you know. If ignorance grasps inherent existence, yeah, then the antidote to that ignorance has to, an inherent existence does not exist. So ignorance is an erroneous consciousness, you know, holding on to a turtle's mustache, something that doesn't exist at all. Then, you know, wisdom can see that that inherent existence does not exist whatsoever, that it's a total hallucination. It never has existed, never will exist. Okay, so wisdom perceives the exact opposite of what ignorance perceives. Okay, so it's directly contradicting to what ignorance is. And so, because wisdom is a realistic mind and perceives things correctly, it can overpower the ignorance, which is erroneous, and in that way remove ignorance from the mind stream altogether. Okay? So that's important to understand. Otherwise, we might say, well, things don't inherently exist, but how do we get rid of the mind that thinks they are? Yeah, you have to have a mind that perceives the exact opposite of what ignorance perceives. Okay? And that mind is a correct consciousness. Okay. So wisdom has the ability to uproot ignorance. Wisdom has the ability to uproot ignorance. The more we become accustomed to wisdom, the more ignorance and the other afflictions diminish until they cease altogether. So it isn't that one flash of perceiving emptiness eliminates all the afflictions, immediately, because we're quite familiar with the wrong way of apprehending things. And it's going to take us a while to overcome our bad habit. Okay? So that's why we need to meditate on emptiness repeatedly over a long period of time, and why all the afflictions gradually are eliminated. So they're in different stages, and as you progress on the path, you eliminate different levels of afflictions until they're all completely gone. Okay? And another thing to understand is that ignorance is the root of all the other afflictions. Okay? So while we may counteract things like hatred or jealousy or greed by using different ways of thinking, like with greed, to think about the benefits of being being generous, to remember the impermanence of the object we're so attached to. While those antidotes can decrease the greed, but while meditating on love or meditating on fortitude can decrease the hatred and resentment, those kind of antidotes cannot eliminate those afflictions completely, because those afflictions are based on the ignorance that's grasping at true existence. So we can decrease those afflictions, but not cut them off at the root. Yeah. So that's why realizing emptiness is so important, because by uprooting emptiness, then,
Uprooting ignorance.
thank you. I'm confusing words a lot nowadays. Uprooting ignorance. Just testing if you guys are listening. By uprooting ignorance, then, the things that rely on ignorance to exist can no longer stand up. Okay, and they collapse too.
Does wisdom realizing emptiness have to realize the emptiness of itself and therefore also uproot all of the things that wisdom realizing emptiness realizes?
Yes, yeah, because emptiness is also empty. The wisdom realizing emptiness is also empty. So that wisdom realizes the emptiness of all phenomena.
If that's the case, never mind.
So is emptiness inherent?
No,
But it doesn't rely on it, right?
yes, it does. Emptiness does rely on other things, because emptiness isn't some kind of absolute truth existing independently in the universe. Okay? It has to be the emptiness of an emptiness of a certain object. So there's the emptiness of the thermos, the emptiness of the cloth, the emptiness of the tissue, the emptiness of you, the emptiness of me. Okay? So for emptiness to exist, there has to be a conventional object that has emptiness as its ultimate nature. Yeah, we like to think there's some kind of absolute truth somewhere floating around in the universe, independent of everything. No. Everything that exists is dependent on other factors, including emptiness. Okay. The afflictions that have beginninglessly obscured our mind are not abandoned by prayer, by requesting blessings from the Buddha or deities, or by gaining single-pointed concentration. So His Holiness stresses this so much, because so many people, people like to pray, and think, oh, well, there's somebody outside me that is more powerful than me, and if I just pray, then whoever that deity or God or whatever it is, they will fix the problem, and they will eliminate my ignorance, or they will get rid of inherent existence somehow. Okay? And His Holiness says, no, prayer is not the cause for realizing emptiness. Yeah, we have to cultivate wisdom. So making aspirational prayers is something that helps. Yeah, because we have to aspire to realize emptiness. We can request the Buddha's inspiration to realize emptiness, but that realization comes from inside ourselves. Yeah, so we have to exert the effort and realize emptiness ourselves. Yeah, and so similarly, just having single-pointed concentration, that is not sufficient to realize emptiness. That's a concentrated mind, which is incredibly helpful, but it doesn't necessarily realize emptiness. Because otherwise, we could just sit there and go, Buddha, 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 please may I realize emptiness. Please may all my afflictions disappear. Please this, please that. And if that were the only thing that worked, and that was all that was necessary, the Buddha's compassionate, he would have eliminated all that stuff already. Yeah. But nobody else can make us realize emptiness. Nobody else can make our mind do anything. We're the only one who can ultimately do something. Okay. So the afflictions are eradicated only by wisdom that analyzes and then directly perceives ultimate reality. And so that's the only thing that cuts the afflictions. Because ignorance has an antidote, it can be removed, and liberation is possible. Destroying the afflictions does not destroy the mind itself. Okay? The pure nature of the mind remains. This is the meaning of ignorance and afflictions being adventitious. Okay? So when you take the mud out of the water, you're not destroying the water. When you take the clouds, when the wind blows the clouds out of the space, it doesn't destroy the space. So similarly, taking the afflictions out of the mind does not destroy the mind, and the pure nature of the mind remains. Okay? So that's good. Yeah. So, that's why we should have confidence in ourselves, yeah, because we have a mind that has the conventional clear light nature, which enables us to realize things, and because it has the ultimate clear light nature, yeah, which allows for that realization to occur. Okay. Each Buddhist tenet system, okay, so a tenet system is a system, a philosophical system, and so there's several different ones. The way that the Tibetans, in India, when Buddhism was there, they were debated so much. People had so many different ideas, and they would debate. And so gradually there grew certain groups of people who shared common beliefs. And then when Buddhism went into Tibet, one way they had of making sense of this whole incredible wealth of material that came, some of which, came from looking at different things from different perspectives, is they organized it into these tenet systems. So these tenet systems were related to certain groups that were in India, but the Tibetans organized them and made them kind of as if they were really solid, things. So they did that as a pedagogical tool to help us learn. So it's not like in India, you had to be a card-carrying Madhyamaka or a card-carrying Vaibhasika, and before you could get into the debate ground, they checked, the register to making sure that you were enrolled in that philosophical school, and it wasn't like that, okay? And it's not like certain monasteries, were Vaibhasika monasteries, and others were Sautrantika monasteries. People lived all mixed together, and it was very rich because they would have all these discussions and debates because of that. Okay, and even, like Nalanda Monastery, they even had non-Buddhists attending there, and they would debate with the non-Buddhists. So it was a very rich culture in terms of learning. So each Buddhist tenet system has a slightly different interpretation of liberation and nirvana, but all agree that it is a quality of the mind that has been forever separated from the defilements causing samsara through the application of antidotes to those defilements. Okay, so they may have all sorts of debates about what is liberation and nirvana, but they all see that when they say it's a quality of a mind, here quality refers to the emptiness of a mind, and that mind has been forever separated from the defilements, so its emptiness has been forever separated from the defilements that cause samsara, and those defilements are gone not just because they're asleep or they're latent or nothing's triggered them, but the antidote to all those defilements has been applied, and so the defilements have been cut off from the root. Okay, it's like we have one tree outside of my cabin. Some seed, it's a maple tree, it fell in between some stones. Yeah, and the tree grows, and then it casts shade on the garden where we're trying to grow some vegetables. So usually every year, we didn't cut it off this year, but in previous years, every year we cut the tree off. Yeah, somewhere along the trunk. It's just, a small tree, and it gets cut. And then every year it grows back because the seed and the roots are still there under the rocks. We can't see them and we can't get to them. So because it hasn't been uprooted completely, even though you cut it off, the tree still grows back. And this year we didn't cut it off at all, so maybe it's going to have a life here after all. I would actually like to transplant it and move it up near Prajna house if we could get to the roots. Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah?
Take the analogy further. What would the Buddhist equivalent of salting the earth to prevent your afflictions from growing? What would that be?
I've
Maybe a
never heard of
lobotomy?
that analogy, actually.
Oh, you salt the earth, nothing grows anymore,
Yeah.
good or bad.
Yeah, but I've never heard that analogy in Buddhism. Yeah, so I don't know how I would reply.
Maybe a lobotomy.
When we examine that separation from defilements, we discover it is the ultimate nature of the mind that is free from defilements. Okay, so the separation from defilements, being true cessation, is the ultimate nature of the mind. So His Holiness is saying that true cessations are emptiness and our ultimate truth. This ultimate nature of the mind has existed from beginningless time. It exists as long as there is mind, and mind can never be destroyed. Within the continuum of a sentient being, the ultimate nature of that mind is called the Buddha nature or Buddha potential. When it becomes endowed with the quality of having separated from defilements, it is called nirvana. Okay, so when it hasn't been separated from defilements, like the emptiness of our mind right now, then it's called Buddha nature. Okay, when our mind is separated from all defilements completely, then that same emptiness is called nirvana, or the nirvana of a Buddha specifically.
I have a question about what is meant by beginningless time.
Okay.
Because I'm trying to it makes sense to me if we're talking from the emergence of organic life, let's say.
Yeah.
But beginningless time, is that got the bigger meaning?
Yeah.
How
Okay.
can
So-
mind exist without those someone to have a mind?
Well, because all those things, from a Buddhist viewpoint, everything, the continuum of everything is actually beginningless in terms of things that are matter. Maybe you trace it back to the Big Bang, but there's things that existed before the Big Bang too. And the more you go back, there's just different forms of matter changing forms. And there's no point where you can reach, where you can say, okay, here's the dividing line. Matter, material started here, and before that there was no material or potential for material at all. So it's the same with consciousness. Yeah, we can trace back one moment of mind to the previous moment that caused it and on back, and we can never find a beginning to the mind. And so similarly with time, there's no beginning. It's like when you have the number line, you can't find a beginning or end either way you look. Okay, so it's like that. It's like you have to think about infinity and feel comfortable with infinity. Okay, so when it becomes endowed with the quality of having separated from defilements, it is called nirvana. Therefore, the very basis for nirvana, the emptiness of the mind, is always with us. That's called natural nirvana. Yeah, because the mind, by its very nature, is empty. That's always there. It's not newly created. It needs to be realized. Okay? So it's not something newly created or gained from outside. It's the nature of the mind itself. Furthermore, the mind's good qualities can be cultivated limitlessly, transforming our mind into a Buddha's fully awakened mind. 3 factors make this possible. Okay, so the first one, the clear and cognizant nature of the mind is a stable basis for the cultivation of all excellent qualities. Okay, so the clear light mind is firm and continual. It cannot be severed. Qualities cannot be cultivated limitlessly on an unstable basis, such as the physical body. Yeah. The more we train in excellent qualities based on this firm basis, the more those qualities will be enhanced limitlessly until they are perfected in the state of Buddhahood. Then the second reason that the mind is a good basis for the cultivation of qualities limitlessly is the mind can be habituated to good qualities that are built up cumulatively. So good mental qualities can be built up gradually without having to begin all over again each time we focus on developing them. A high jumper cannot develop his ability limitlessly. Each time the bar is raised, he must cover the same distance as before, plus some. However, the energy from cultivating a mental quality today remains, so that if we cultivate that same quality tomorrow, we are able to build upon what we did yesterday. Okay, that's if we practice consistently. If we practice one day and then we don't practice for a while, then we need to go over and build up what we had once had before. Because we do not need the same degree of energy to get to yesterday's level again, the same effort will serve to increase that good quality. Of course, this requires consistent training on our part. Otherwise, like an athlete, our spiritual muscles will atrophy. But if we practice regularly, our energy can be directed to enhancing the good qualities continuously until the point where they become so familiar that they are natural and spontaneous. And then the third reason is the good qualities are enhanced, not diminished, by reasoning and wisdom. So constructive attitudes and emotions have a valid support in reasoning and thus are thus never harmed by the wisdom realizing reality. Compassion, faith, integrity, and all other excellent qualities can be cultivated together with wisdom and are enhanced by wisdom. For this reason, too, they can be cultivated limitlessly. Yeah. All Buddhist traditions accept that vast good qualities can be cultivated and defilements can be entirely eliminated from the mind. Each tradition describes the basis upon which this occurs somewhat differently. And so now we're going to move into what is meant by Buddha nature. Okay, any questions so far?
So it says the good qualities can be cultivated limitlessly until you reach Buddhahood, which kind of sounds like a limit. Or does it keep going?
Buddhahood is inconceivable, so the qualities have been developed limitlessly by Buddhahood.
Vague.
Yes, it is vague.
Okay.
Yeah, because they say that there's certain things that our conceptual mind cannot grasp. So I think that's got to be one of them. Yeah, how it's limitless and that yet it can be attained. Okay. So we're starting with the Pali tradition about what Buddha nature is. Okay, so in the Pali scriptures, the Buddha identified certain characteristics that reveal spiritual practitioners' aptitude for liberation. Having modest desire and a sense of contentment signify people are genuine spiritual practitioners aiming for liberation. Okay, so that's one quality that reflects the spiritual practitioner's aptitude for liberation. Vasubandhu also talks about these in the Sanskrit tradition, these four. Okay. Indicating their potential to gain attainments, these characteristics should be cultivated daily. Certain characteristics, usually they talk about having modest desire, a sense of contentment. Yeah, and then I think there's two more, which I can't remember. It must have to do with modest desire, sense of content. Anyway, maybe it's just those. So that indicates their potential to gain attainments. These characteristics should be cultivated daily. Okay, so just starting out as Dharma practitioners, cultivating modest desire and a sense of contentment. Very important. Yeah.
And to me, this sounds like it's describing arhatship nature instead of Buddha nature. Because it's talking about liberation rather than complete enlightenment.
Yeah. But see, it says it's talking about their, it says certain characteristics that reveal spiritual practitioners' aptitude for liberation. So they don't call it Buddha nature. Okay, it's their potential to gain attainments. Yeah, that lead to liberation. But if we want to become a Buddha, we also have to have the qualities that you need that are essential for liberation too. So we have to work on these as well. Some sutras speak of the mind being luminous and this being the basis for mental development. The Buddha says, and this is from the Pali Sutras, the mind, bhikshus, is luminous, but it is defiled by adventitious defilements. Uninstructed worldlings do not understand this as it really is. Therefore, for them, there is no development of the mind. This bhikshus, the mind bhikshus, is luminous, and it is freed from adventitious defilements. Instructed Aryas understand this as it really is. Therefore, for them, there is development of the mind. And then the Buddha also said, where consciousness is signless, boundless, all luminous, and so on. Okay, so that's not talking about Buddha nature, but it's talking about the luminous nature of the mind and the qualities of the mind and the qualities practitioners need to cultivate in order to attain nirvana.
The very last time down the rabbit hole. So when you talk about a timeline, you use the timeline, you talk about infinite time and space. Wait a minute. That would be inherent. right? That's not dependent on anything, right? I mean, that
No, that doesn't our mind have to think it?
but thinking is that, but you were
Doesn't-
saying that exists, right? I mean, regardless of whether I
Right.
thought time and space was infinite, I mean, it would still exist, right?
But things only exist in relationship to a mind that is able to perceive them. Things can't exist independent from all consciousness whatsoever.
You did say earlier that it existed independent of consciousness.
I probably said independence on. Nothing is independent of consciousness. Because the definition of existent is something perceptible by the mind. So to be existent, it has to be perceptible by the mind. And from the Prasangika view, one of the highest tenet system, it says things exist by being merely designated by the mind, not independent of the mind.
His question was about beginningless time
Yeah,
and not understanding how before there was organic material for a mind stream to inhabit, how a mind stream would exist to perceive.
because there's
beginningless
always a
time.
cause for both material, always a cause for mind, going back infinitely.
So that's the assumption that before the Big Bang, while there would have been some potential for matter, we're not just talking about potential for mind, we're talking about
Yeah.
mind.
Right. Yeah. You see, our mind, we grew up in a society, in Christian society, there's a beginning. Yeah. But if you really analyze that, how can there be a beginning? Because even according to theistic theology, before the beginning of the world, God existed. So the beginning of the world was not the beginning because something existed before the beginning, God. So even from their own theology, having a beginning doesn't make any sense. And then you have to ask, who created God? God what?
A, B, C, D, E.
E.
He's talking about one God created another God.
So you could, if you wanted to say that, then there's beginningless gods.
Yeah, an infinite regret.
I don't agree with any of that, but it illustrates the idea of everything that changes arises due to causes. You can't have anything that changes that arises without cause. So for God, even if you assert a God, for God to create, that means God itself is a produced phenomena, which means that God exists dependent on causes. And the causes of God dependent on cause. And those causes, and you can't find a beginning.
I can, with beginningless time and infinity, I can accept that there was the potential for matter at some point when we can't know for sure if matter existed in the state that it currently does.
Yeah, we don't even know for sure if the Big Bang exists.
Yes.
It's all theory.
But along with that, I can accept the potential for mind. Because we have mind. Therefore, there was potential, there was all the...
Why would mind have to begin when the universe began?
It doesn't have to.
Yeah.
But this postulates that it always was.
Yeah.
Why would that have to be the case?
Because one moment of mind was caused by the previous moment of mind, caused by the previous moment of mind, caused by the previous moment of mind, and you can never find an initial moment of mind.
I feel like that's to say that the potential for mind is mind.
I don't know. What do you mean by the potential of mind? It's just one moment of mind. The mind has many different forms. There's human mind, animal mind, different kinds of mind. But clarity and cognizance, one moment of clarity and cognizance exists due to its cause, the previous moment of clarity of cognizance. And then you just trace it back like that.
Well, we can't find the first moment of matter, but that doesn't negate matter currently.
Yeah, so we can't find the moment of mind either.
But
So,
that doesn't mean matter always existed. It
But-
means the potential for matter.
yeah, but
existed.
I'm describing matter as including whatever potential it is.
Then the potential for mind is mind.
You can say whatever you want. No, I've explained what I have to say. I really don't have more to say.
Mhm.
So you either accept it or reject it or think some more about it. But, I don't have another way of explaining it. Maybe somebody else does.
I'm wondering why you
Okay.
need a potential for mind if you've already got mind.
Yeah.
Because what got us onto this was beginningless time and mind not having forms to incarnate into.
Well, you also have the formless realm where you have beings in deep samadhi that don't have bodies.
You also have other universes.
Yeah. And there's plenty of other universes and things like that. So we don't have to hang on to matter.
And when we die, matter stays here anyway.
Yeah.
Mind goes on.
Yep.
It's just that's why I was thinking in those terms, because we were talking about beginningless time and minds not having something to incarnate into. I was going off of that question.
Yeah. But mind doesn't need to have matter to exist. Doesn't need gross matter. Right. Anyway, well, we need to stop, but you have one question?
Just to say, I went over this chapter last night, and the confusion in my mind was, there are all these questions I've had in my mind. Because when you talk, I think mind is a bad word. It's the only one, I can't think of another one,
Yeah.
but you expect a being to there. So that to mind in the abstract is really hard to put your mind around. Because there always seems to be a being connected to mind, and I can't get past that
But
limitation of
in one
language.
way there is, because the consciousness or mind is the basis of designation, for the person. It's a deeper basis. Our body in one way is a basis of designation for who we are. The collection of the body and mind is a basis of designation for who we are. But our body is not a stable thing. We have many, many different bodies, whereas just one moment of clarity of consciousness produces the next. And in dependence on that, you can label a living being. Yeah, so we say that there's beginningless living beings.
That for me, that is really hard to grasp.
Okay, yeah, it is hard to grasp. It's definitely
And I'll
hard.
take,
Yeah.
it's something to meditate on.
Yeah,
rather.
because our way of thinking is, we think of just this earth or just this universe. Our way of thinking is very restricted. And that's why these things are hard to imagine. Yeah, because we want to, it's like only as far as what I can see and hear. Look, if you think about it, we have a hard time accepting that dogs and cats can hear things that we can't. How come they can hear things that we can't? Doesn't that almost seem like magic? No? But what I'm getting at is, our way of thinking limits us. Okay? If you go to some tribes in the Amazon and you say that, people walked on the moon, they're going to say you're crazy. If you go to certain tribes and you show them a photograph of a human being, they will not recognize it as a photograph of a human being. Because the conceptual process, knowing that and being able to identify that hasn't been developed in their culture. Yeah. So what I'm getting at is, our way of thinking very often limits us, even in terms of what we can conceptually understand. Yeah. And so, that's one of the things we struggle with, isn't it?